All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We know we have a full presentation from Andrew, so we want to be respectful of his time and allow for time for question and answers. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping items. Just as reminders, you will find handouts for each session on the presenters page if they have shared them with us. And sometimes they will be adding the sessions after the session or the materials after the session. Remember that those are going to be in the Whova app. Recordings for this session, we've had lots of questions, are going to be posted in 2 to 3 weeks. So please allow for some time for that. And just, a shameless plug, tonight is the Blue Pencil and Gold Screen Awards ceremony at 8 o'clock on the Eastern time. So please, if you, or whether you're winning an award or just want to go and support your colleagues, please do tune in for that. My name is Leslie Gervasio. I am with the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs in the capital city of Harrisburg. I'm also a member of the board of the National Association of Government Communicators. Today, I'm proud to introduce Andrew Buck. He's a content strategist for Mighty Citizen. He's going to present on writing effective web copy, and he assures it's going to be an interactive web presentation. So without further ado, we'll let Andrew take it from here.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, thank you. Hi, everybody. A couple things at the outset here. We got a lot to get through, so I'm going to be talking probably like 110% of my normal pace. I apologize in advance. Luckily, we are recording this, and the slide deck will be available to you. The other little caveat I wanted to offer before we begin is that I adopted a new Corgi puppy less than a week ago. He's currently asleep, but I want to apologize in advance if he decides to rouse himself from his sleep and start making those little Corgi yelps in the background. I'll do my best to fight through that. So thanks for your patience if that happens. But listen, this is a topic that I love. I will admit it's a bit daunting to present to this particular conference because I'm speaking to folks who do this almost every day, if not every day, for a living. That said, this is sort of the culmination of many, many years of working directly with a bunch of organizations just like those that you work for. And we hope certainly that there's some stuff in here that you find helpful. Please make sure to put your questions or comments in the chat. We'll try to address those at the end. If we have to go over a little bit and you want to, I'm happy to do that. But without any further ado, let's just jump into it. And I like to start this presentation by telling a story that I hope illustrates why we're spending an hour on a Wednesday afternoon talking about website copy. And the story involves this man you see on your screen here. His name is David Ogilvy. If you're not familiar with David Ogilvy, he was a really fascinating guy. Born in Scotland, came to America in the 1930s, went to work for the original Gallup organization doing customer research. So it was really there at the vanguard of researching audiences. And then he moved into advertising copywriting. And that's really where he built his empire, an empire that's still going today in the form of his ad agency that's a big global player in that sector. But the story about him that I love, it takes place in the early 1960s. At this point, he's already quite rich, quite powerful, and he's living in New York City. And it happens to be the very first day of spring in New York City. And if you've ever been to the city in the spring, you know it's a pretty special place because New Yorkers have spent the previous few months hibernating in the winter. So the streets are packed. The sun is out. People are heading to the park, heading to work. It's a really gorgeous, special day. And Ogilvy's walking down the street and he passes a man who is clearly homeless, sitting on the street. And the man is also blind. And he has a cup and a little cardboard sign that says, "I'm hungry, please help." And Ogilvy notices that nobody has stopped to pay attention to this guy. His cup is empty. People are literally walking over him as they go about their day. And he has sort of he was a tremendous copywriter, and he had this sort of moment of inspiration. So he leaned down and he asked the man if he could borrow his cardboard sign, and he takes the sign and he flips it over to the back side and he pulls out his, Mont Blanc pen, I'm sure, and he writes a new message. and hands it back to the guy. And the story goes that later that day, Ogilvy's walking back down the street, comes back upon this man who is, again, homeless and blind. And wouldn't you know it, his cup is overflowing with money. People are not only not stepping over him, they're stopping, they're talking to him, and they're giving him money. So the question is, what did Ogilvy write that made such a profound difference on that day? And this is what he wrote. It is spring, and I am blind. Now, there's a lot, we could probably do a good half-hour session on just this message and what makes it work. Technically, I think it's lovely because it's short, right? Typically, shorter is better when trying to connect with strangers. There's a rhythm to it. It's almost like a haiku, right? You've got these 7 one-word syllables. You've got a lot of symmetry in there, right? It is blank and I am blank, right? But I think what's most compelling for most folks when they hear this story is the sort of humanity built into this message, the sort of forced empathy, if you will. If you were to read this sign while enjoying this first beautiful sunny day of spring, you're forced, even if just for a second, even if really sort of subconsciously, to reckon with the fact that you are quite fortunate as compared to some other folks. And that builds a moment of real human connection. So there's a lot to love about this message. And again, I think it's a lovely illustration of why it's important for us to take the time and to build the experience, frankly, to craft messages that are especially wonderful and not simply just okay or passable. And that's what I hope to do today. Real quick introduction. Well, actually, here are the 2 things I want to cover today. It's a pretty simple agenda. I want to start by identifying the sort of unique challenges that we're all up against as professional communicators, website copywriters. And then I want to spend the bulk of our presentation today talking about 7 tactics that I've sussed out that I think are especially helpful when trying to communicate on the web. And I'm mostly talking here about websites, although a lot of what we're going to talk about today is certainly applicable to other forms of digital communication, such as social media and email. So real quick, that's me. And my name is Andrew Buck. I'm a content strategist at a company called Mighty Citizen. Mighty Citizen is a full-service marketing agency located in Austin, Texas. We focus on mission-oriented organizations, so a big portion of our clientele are, in fact, government agencies. So we feel very familiar with the particular challenges and opportunities that come with writing for the web for the government. I've been in this industry for almost 20 years now. I'm obsessive about reading and writing, and I hope that comes through. By the way, there is my email address on the screen there, a buck, like a dollar bill, right? A buck at mightycitizen.com. Feel free to email me anytime with any questions or thoughts. I'm a total geek for this stuff and happy to talk about it at any time. So with that all said, let's jump in to the good stuff. Pretty much every time I speak at a conference, regardless of the topic, I guess I'm a masochist because I love to start by really, really blowing out the problem and understanding all, or at least the most important facets of the problem. And when it comes to website copywriting, there are a lot of challenges we face, some of which you're probably instinctively familiar with and others you may not be. So let's go through some of those to start. So the first is the human attention span. This might be the biggest of all. And a global study conducted way back in 2000 found that the average human's attention span was about 12 seconds. We gave 12 seconds of attention to any one bit of data or thought before either moving on or digging in further and extending it to another thought. Now, at the time, we had goldfish positively crushed because they were a measly 9 seconds. But the same global study conducted sometime later, and back in 2013, found that our attention span had plummeted to 8 seconds. So from 12 to 8 seconds. 12 is already pretty measly. 8 seconds is downright microscopic, right? So what happened between 2000 and 2013 that would account for such a change? Well, you probably already know it is digital technology. It is smartphones. It is the rise of social media. It is the access to the internet that is sort of so ubiquitous now that we take it for granted, but it has a real measurable effect on the attention span of the people you're trying to communicate with. Now, why is this relevant? Well, because you have precious few seconds to capture the attention of someone and convert it into interest. And of course, we're going to talk about some ways to do that here in a bit, but let's acknowledge at the outset that we are literally right up against the clock. Now, combined with that is the fact that there's just a ton of content. Every 60 seconds, a massive amount of data makes its way onto the internet, most of it to stay there forever. So you can see some of the numbers there. I mean, they're just outrageous. And again, we're talking about this is what happens every minute on the internet. Now, why is this relevant? Well, I think it's especially relevant for organizations and professional communicators like us, because I think we have to stop thinking about our competitors as other organizations that do the same thing we do. Now, listen, when it comes to government agencies, it's rarer for you to have direct competitors. Usually you have something of a monopoly, depending on what type of agency you are, of course. That said, the true competitor of any organization, and maybe even especially government agencies, is not similar organizations. It is the internet itself. It's the glut of content, right? So we have to acknowledge that there are ever increasing reasons for people not to pay attention to what we have to say. So in addition to that 8-second attention span, coming down, an increase in content creates obviously a real conflict and a pretty enormous hurdle for us to overcome. Okay, so those are the two biggies, but there are some other pretty big ones that we have to keep in mind. The other is that people don't read on screens, they scan, they hunt, they skim, they peruse in the truest sense, right, of that word. Why is this important? Because often we write for websites or emails or social media in the way that we learned to write as students, frankly, and as children, frankly, which is to write generally for print, right? And that's just not the way. And we're going to talk in a little while about the implications of this fact. But let's just acknowledge that the way people look at screens, whether it's on their phone or their laptop or desktop computer, is just very different. They're either on the hunt for something specific that they know they want, or they're looking to be sort of surprised. They're looking to maybe discover something they didn't know, or even didn't know they didn't know, right? And so there are some real implications for that when we're writing for our sites. Okay, next challenge, literacy level. So I'll pose it, and maybe if you want to type it into the chat, you certainly can type your best guess. The average American adult reads at what grade level? I'll let you all take a hankering and I'll give you a countdown and then I'll reveal the answer. So 3, 2, 1. The average American adult reads at the 8th grade level. So what does that really mean? It means that anything written above the 8th grade level, and by the way, when we're talking about grade level readability, we're referencing the most sort of popular readability score. There's a ton of them out there, but the most popular and often used one is one called the Flesch-Kincaid score. You may be familiar with it. So it means that anything written above an 8.0 grade level, according to that, the Flesch-Kincaid score, cannot be comprehended by at least half of the people who read it. Think about that. That's pretty powerful stuff. In fact, an earlier version of this presentation had a bunch of additional statistics about literacy levels, and I took them out because they were just so depressing. I mean, it is hard out there, and especially for government agencies, which are often trying to connect with people who have a lower reading level. So if you're writing at an 8th grade reading level and your average audience reads at, say, a 6th grade level, you're going over the heads of countless people, and therefore you're not engaging them, you're not getting them the services they need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? I could go on and on about this. I'll mostly leave it here, except to say this. It's very important that you gauge the reading level of what you put on your website. That means score it. It's very easy for the readability to go over 8 and you not even realize it. And if you score it and it comes in at like 10, you got to get it down. And by the way, the quickest way to get the reading score of a piece of text down is to shorten the sentences. A lot of people think it's about word choice, and that's part of it, but it really is the length of sentences. So stop writing these multi-clause run-ons and get nice, short, choppy sentences that are very descriptive. Okay. One or two more things. So this is the curse of knowledge is something I talk about so much around the Mighty Citizen offices that my coworkers get a little eye rolly with me because I just can't stop going on and on about it. So what is the curse of knowledge? Okay. The curse of knowledge says, in a nutshell, that once you know something, excuse me, once you know something, anything, it's impossible to imagine what it was like not to know that thing, right? You can't even put yourself into the mindset of someone who doesn't know that thing. Why is this relevant here? Because I think that the curse of knowledge is the crux of the marketer or professional communicator's challenge. Our challenge is we know something. We want someone who doesn't know that thing to come to know that thing. And how do we bridge that gap when we can't imagine what it's like to be them? Now, the most obvious place that the mind goes when you first learn about the curse of knowledge, I think for most folks is jargon and lingo, right? We all hear that we got to reduce the amount of jargon and lingo. That's true. That's a big part of it. But it goes, I think, quite a bit further, in part because the things that we think of as jargon or lingo, it might be kind of a narrow definition. There might be things that we don't think are particularly lingo-like, but which are to the people we're trying to communicate with. But beyond just that sort of word choice, the curse of knowledge means that we think about our organization, whatever your employer is, roughly 40 hours a week, all right? The people you're trying to communicate to think about your organization roughly 0 hours per week, right? And so anytime you say anything or write anything, you're doing it from a place of deep and immense context, while they being the audience you're trying to communicate with, have none of that context at all. Now, you would think if it's impossible to imagine what it was like not to know something, well, then how do we bridge that gap? Well, luckily, there are some shortcuts, some provable tactics, some sort of researched user experience best practices that we can begin to implement. That's what we're going to talk about here in just a moment. But the curse of knowledge is one of those biggies that I hope you take away if you weren't already familiar with it. So, having established the problem, right, and made it seem very dire, and let's figure out how to attack it and to make sure that the words, and by the way, I want to make this clear. When I say copy, I mean the words. That may be obvious, but the word content gets used a lot in the world of marketing and communications, as well it should. But content is so much more than just the words. So today we're really focused on the words we put on our website, into our emails to our constituents, into any social media posts, into our annual report, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so let's jump right into 7 tactics, things to do to write better website copy. Okay, and the first comes in the form of a story. Shocker, right? So the woman on your screen right now, you may recognize her. Her name is Nora Ephron. She was, rest in peace, a truly wonderful writer. One of my favorites. She was primarily a screenwriter. She wrote the screenplays for When Harry Met Sally and Sleepless in Seattle and Julie and Julia and You've Got Mail and a number of others. What do all her movies tend to have in common? They're very, very popular. They're crowd pleasers. People tend to really like them. So she sort of understood something. And there's a story about her that I think exemplifies the first and maybe most important thing we need to do as professional communicators. And the story goes like this. She's a senior in high school. She was at Beverly Hills High School, right? Must be nice. So she's a senior in high school and they offer a journalism class. So she signs up, and one of the very first days of this high school journalism class, the journalism teacher comes in and says, all right, we're going to practice writing the lead for a story in the student newspaper, right? The school newspaper. And a lead, spelled L-E-D-E, by the way, of a news story is the very first sentence of a news story. And it's meant to convey the most important information about that story, right? It's a little more difficult than it sounds, especially when you have a bunch of facts and you got to figure out what to lead with. So these are the facts that he gave the entire class. He said, I'm going to give you a bunch of facts and I want you to write the lead, the first sentence, as if you were writing this up for the student newspaper. And these are the facts that he gave the class. Kenneth L. Peters, principal of Beverly Hills High School, announced today that the entire school faculty will travel to Sacramento next Thursday for a colloquium in new teaching methods. Among the speakers will be anthropologist Margaret Mead, college president Dr. Robert Maynard Hutchins, and California Governor Pat Brown. So all the students put their head down. They start trying to figure out, all right, what's the most important fact here? What's the lead for the student newspaper? Nora Ephron, being a genius, led with this. There will be no school next Thursday. Now, even though you're all on mute, I can almost hear the riotous laughter coming through my computer because it's a lovely story, apparently true. And it demonstrates what is the most important thing we can do as website copywriters. And that is focus like a laser beam on our audience, on their needs, on their biases, on their expectations, on their experience, on their reading level, right? And not on ours. Far too often organizations, and I see this time and again with our government agency clients, for one reason or another, sometimes truly political, bureaucratic, inertia, they write what they think people want to know or need to know, while it's often very divorced from the reality of what people need to know or want to know or how they want to come to know it. So the first tactic I want to emphasize here, and then by the way, this is not, I know this is not some huge revelation, but it is so easy to forget that we have to be obsessed with our audiences and their needs and wants, not ours. We do a fair amount of copywriting for our clients. And whenever I do that for a client, one of the first things I do is look for opportunities to trade out any mention of us or our or we for you and your. Just doing that alone forces me to think more about the users. In addition to the fact that I have a sticky note on my computer monitor at the office that says, remember the audience, because it's easy in our 40 hours a week, focus on our organization to drift from that, right? It's very easy. So we have to constantly pull ourselves back to that reality. So again, focus on what your audience needs to know first and what they might want to learn. Don't include things they're unlikely to need or want to know, or put that stuff on a subpage. By the way, we've all encountered this. Maybe you have this at your organization right now, the Franken page, right? A page that is just stuffed with information. I don't want to go too far down this digression, but I will say that the way we think, because at Mighty Citizen, we do a lot of website design and development. The way we think of a page on a website is it needs to have a singular purpose and goal and a desired user action. Once we go from singular to double or triple purposes, that's an indication we need a new page, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that I won't get into here, but suffice to say that you want to have one main idea per page, and it should be focused on what your users need to know. Okay, next thing. We're going to have to talk about Google, at least for a moment. So let me check the clock. Okay, so Google is so very important, especially for organizations like yours. We saw that slide earlier that showed the amount of content that goes onto the web every minute. Well, how do you think people find stuff? Well, of course, it's through search, and the vast majority of people use Google. By the way, what I'm about to say also applies to Bing and Yahoo, if those are your favorites. I totally get it. The point here is that you have to take into account how people are going to find you. Especially if they don't quite know what they need from you or that you even exist. Right? Probably my favorite quotation when it comes to the world of digital marketing was someone said that the best place to hide a dead body is on page 2 of Google search results, right? Because no one goes there. In fact, you really want to get up into the top 3 search results for as many phrases and search terms as you conceivably can, because that will absolutely increase the number of people who find you and take advantage of your resources, engage with you, do what you want them to do, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we give Google what they want? Now, this is I'm going to admit, the next 2 minutes while I talk about this is very surface level search engine optimization, right? SEO. You may be very familiar with SEO. You may have only heard of it. This is sort of a 101 to it. Now, the truth is Google doesn't tell us what their search algorithm is, but we can kind of reverse engineer what they want by looking at how they rank different websites. So here are 5 things that Google wants. The first is accessibility to the Google indexer, meaning every so often Google goes through your website, they record every page, all the code on every page, and they put it in a big old index so that they can serve it up when people search, right? Your site needs to be built in such a way that it is friendly to that Google, an old word for it was a spider or a crawler, an indexer, right? If you don't have a lot of control over that, or if your website is old, hasn't been fully redeveloped recently, you're missing out potentially on thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users every year because Google cannot properly index your website. So that's number 1. Number 2, proximity. There's not a lot of control you have over this, but Google knows where you are when you type something in. So that means that if you type sushi restaurant, it shows you the sushi restaurant in your city and not one, across the country. That's one of the real innovations of Google. Again, you don't have a lot of control over this, but there are some ways to pull in people from across the country. If you want to talk more SEO, we've got a bunch of free resources on the Mighty Citizen site. Okay, number 3, engagement, right? Google wants to see, do people, real humans, engage with your content? Do they share it? Do they link to it? Do they forward it? If they do, Google sees that as a sign that it is high quality content and therefore want to share it. Again, you don't have a lot of control over this, except insofar as you can make your content the best content on the web. Now, the last 2 things I'm going to talk about here, you have a ton of control over. They're probably the most important things. The first is links, right? Links to your website or to pages on your website. And this is the key, links within your website. People often overlook internal links. So links from one page on your site to another page on your site. Google actually does like that a lot. It shows a dynamic page that is very thoughtful. So when you're writing a new page or editing a page or just deciding to go through and enhance what you already have, Look for opportunities to link. Now, it's not just good for SEO purposes, it's good for the user. It helps the user stay engaged, find what they need, discover something they didn't know they wanted, but now they definitely do want. So be on the lookout for internal links. And of course, the more people who link to your site from other sites, the greater your search results will be. And then the last one, it's a bit of a vague term, I admit that, but just really great content. You know, that's what sets Google apart from the other search engines, or at least it did when Google first came out and took everything over. It's that they weighed things other than just keywords, right? So they take all of these factors into account to determine the best content on the web. So create really great content with clear sections, relevant links, and visuals that enhance. Again, it's a bit of a little bit of science, a little bit of art that goes into this. And again, if you go to the Mighty Citizen site, we've got a bunch of free templates and videos and stuff that can teach you more about SEO. Okay, so that's the second thing, right? When you're creating content, when you're writing something for your site, ask yourself, should this be SEO friendly? The answer is usually yes, not always, but usually. If it needs to be SEO friendly, right? If you want to rise in the search rankings, make sure it's full of helpful content, dynamic links, highly accessible. If you don't really care about it showing up in search rankings, then you can be a bit more clever or indulgent, right, with your prose. Okay, number 3. I want to introduce you to this man. You may know him, you may not. His name is Charlie Strong. He is the former head football coach at my alma mater, the University of Texas. Now, Charlie Strong didn't have the greatest record as a head coach, and that's why he's no longer at the university, but he is a fascinating guy and a really, really impressive leader. And when he was first brought on as the head coach of the Texas football team, he brought with him what he called his core values, or his team values. Now, typically, when we think of a football coach talking about team values, what do we think about? We think about Friday Night Lights. We think about clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. We think of a rah-rah speech at halftime saying, you know, men, on this team, we're all about sacrifice and discipline and brotherhood and grit and resilience and all those sort of words, right? Charlie Strong had a totally different approach that I think we all need to adopt on our websites, okay? So these were his core values for his team. No drugs, no guns, no stealing, no earrings, attend class and treat women with respect. Now, what's going on here? Well, he was actually kind of teased in the local sports media because people thought, well, where's the stuff like discipline and hard work and brotherhood and sacrifice? Charlie Strong understood something that we all need to come to understand as professional communicators, that when we are communicating to the mass or at scale, and by the way, remember, when you're writing for the web or even for email, you're literally writing across space and time. You're writing something today that won't be read potentially for years by someone on the other side of the country or maybe even the globe, right? So it's important to write with a big net, right? That we can capture as many folks as possible. Charlie Strong understood that when he introduced his core values, because he knew that if he stood up and said, we're all about discipline on this team, he just created 50 different, 50 players on the team, 51 players on the team, 51 different interpretations of what discipline means. Because what discipline means to me is somewhat different than what it means to the guy sitting next to me and the guy sitting next to him. And now there's a lot of room for confusion. These are what we think of as concrete words. And by concrete, I mean physical presence in the real world. Charlie Strong knew that if he could get his team to listen, you're either using drugs or you're not. You either have a gun or you don't. You either steal or you don't. There's almost no room for any confusion here or gray area. It's a very sort of clear cut. And when we're communicating online, we want to be as clear cut as possible. Use as many concrete terms as possible. Concrete messages, and this should say concrete language, is immune to user confusion. If you go to Google image search and type in a non-concrete word, like, say you type in the word helpful, where you're going to get images. You could do this right now. you're going to get images that run the gamut. They're all over the place from all sorts of sources. If you go to Google image search and type in a concrete word like V8 engine, you're going to see a bunch of pictures of V8 engines. And so we want our websites to be more V8 engines, less vague, fuzzy, highly interpretable language. By the way, how do you get concrete? Well, this is one way. It's not the only way, but generally you want to get specific. So a sentence like to do well in college, you have to work hard, pretty vague. But we could say to excel in college, you need to attend class regularly, do all of your reading, communicate with your professors, and regularly review your notes. I've got a couple more examples. I'm going to move through them in the interest of time. But again, this is just one tactic. The bigger point here is just look for opportunities to pull your language, especially on your website, out of the vague, out of the sort of high level, cloud level, and bring it down to the real, to the tangible, physical in the world, okay? All right. So again, there it is. Use concrete language whenever possible. All right, that's number 3. Number 4. So I live in Texas, for better or worse. And May is a historically rainy month in Texas. This May has been no different. Now, in May of 2015, we had an exceptionally rainy month in this state. The rainiest May in my lifetime, right? And the National Weather Service took out this great ad in a bunch of Texas newspapers after that month. And at the top of it, it said what you see here. It said, 35 trillion, with a T, gallons of water fell on Texas during the month of May. Now, that is a big number. For some of us, that might be like, wow, kind of eye-opening. But for most people, that number is meaningless. Why? Because, well, in part because it's so big, and in part because it's about something we don't know about, which is rainfall. I mean, we know rainfall exists, but we don't know how to measure it. We don't measure it ourselves. So it's very divorced. So here's the point I want to make. When your organization decides to share any sort of data, numbers, metrics, etc., you need to do it in a way that is compelling and relatable. Now, the National Weather Service understood this, so they didn't stop by just having a headline that said 35 trillion gallons, because they knew that not only would people not know what that means, it would be totally irrelevant to their lives. So what they did is they tried to translate 35 trillion gallons into a number of different contexts. And I'm just going to give you a couple of them here. They said, that's enough water to cover the entire state in 8 inches. Now, why is that so much better? Well, suddenly it sort of comes to life when we're reading that. We can almost picture this state because we know what 8 inches is, right? Kind of up to our shins or so, right? So we can kind of see it. If you've ever driven across Texas, as I have, it is large. You drive and drive and drive and drive. So we get a sense of scale a little bit. So suddenly that 35 trillion gallons, which by the way, you could tell me there's 35 trillion gallons in the lake here in this town, Austin, Texas, and I'd believe you. You could tell me there's 35 million gallons and I'd believe you, right? But suddenly when you translate it into this context, it comes to life. It's just a lot more interesting. Now, of the 7 or 8 different examples they shared, this was my favorite. Enough rain fell in Texas in 1 month to give every human being on the planet 10,000 days of water, and that's if they all drank 8 glasses of water a day, which of course, very few of us do. So, wow. 10,000 days, by the way, is something like 26 years or something like that. Wow, right? It's still an enormous number. But, I've heard of water crises. I know and suddenly like everyone on the planet can have 8 glasses of water a day for the next 25 years just from the rain that fell in 1 month in the state. Wow. Okay. So I don't want to belabor the point. I think you're starting to get it. I'm going to move through these examples, but the real takeaway here is that when sharing numbers, especially, and especially ones that are large or potentially meaningless, add context. And by the way, it doesn't even have to be context related to your agency. It can be completely unrelated. We had I'm trying to remember, we had client who was kind of like a housing organization that helped people with affordable housing, and they shared their annual report about the amount of money saved and the fees reduced by connecting it to the number of Teslas that they could have bought for people. Teslas have nothing to do with their mission, but it suddenly brings it to life. So at a minimum, it brings it to life, and at best, it really conveys the scope and scale of your numbers. Okay, 3 more things, and then we'll have time for questions. And I think we're right on time here. So I hope they're not on the call today. I seriously doubt it, but this is the former homepage. To their credit, they recently redesigned it, but this is not too long ago, this was the homepage of the Montana Association of Counties. I've used this example in other presentations because it's just such a sort of hyperbolic example of cognitive load, right? There's so much going on this page. Imagine landing here and trying to find something you're on the look for. I mean, first of all, if you didn't just immediately click back on your browser and you decided to sort of wade into this, you've got your work cut out for you. There's actually the screenshot here, you can't see it, but there's actually a slight little menu above the blue menu. So you got something like 5 or 6 different menus to choose from. Within each menu, you've got tons of selections. It's just a nightmare for your brain. Okay, so this is a don't do this example, right? We do not want to do this. Here's a much simpler example of what I mean. The text on the left and the right are identical. The difference is that the text on the right is just so much more, so much easier to read, right? And why is it easier to read? Well, there's some obvious reasons, right? It's got a title. That's nice. It kind of orients us. It's got a photo or an image that's relevant to the text. It's got more white space. That's one of the big ones, right? So the point here is, and this, I've put it this way before, and some of my coworkers would certainly kill me if they heard this version of it. But on your website, and by the way, this definitely goes for email too, how you say something on your site is often more important than what you say. Why? Because if you say things in such a way and you organize them in such a way that it is difficult for people to make sense of them, it doesn't matter what you say because they're never going to get to it, right? So the manner in which you organize your text on your site is at least as important as what the text has to say. There's something called the F pattern in website design. This is just a sort of randomly selected screenshot. It's an article from Science Magazine's website. There's a great organization called the Nielsen Norman Group, and they do a lot of user research to understand how people use the web. And one of their big findings is something they call the F pattern. So they've took thousands of people and tracked how their eyes move when surfing the web. And they found that mostly people read websites according to sort of a capital F, meaning when you land on a site, they read the top, and then as they move down the page and scroll down, their eyes kind of line up along the left, occasionally darting over to the right, and the further they go down, the less the eyes move to the right, and the less and less and less until the bottom of the page. They're probably not even making it to the bottom of the page, depending on the page, but what are the implications for this truth? And by the way, this is a truth and this is mostly for desktop sites or laptop sites. Mobile sites are a nightmare. If you look at eye tracking software for how people look at their phones, there's no discernible pattern. It is all over the place. But what are the implications for this? Well, first of all, people are not going to read everything that we have to say. You want to lead with your lead, right? Lead with the most important information. Put it at the top of the page. Don't get clever. The example, I was just thinking of this last night. I was looking for a recipe. I found a page with a recipe, and all I want is the recipe. But I got to scroll through like 7 paragraphs about the cook's feelings on that day and how their kids were driving them nuts. And so they decide, I scrolled right past it. I didn't read it. People are not going to read everything we have to say. especially if we put the most important stuff at the bottom. So bring it up, put information carrying words along the left side. Try not to start your paragraphs with a bunch of, sort of clauses and stuff. Use the key vocabulary at the beginning of your paragraphs, etc. Listen, the gist of this point is to make it easy on the eyeballs and the brains of your users. Add as much white space as feasible. You should be using more paragraph breaks and wider margins than you're used to. If you're going to use images on your site, and you should, only use it to enhance and space out the text. Do not put an image on a page just because that's something you think people do. And by the way, please use custom photography if at all possible. And if not possible, pay for the high quality stock photography. There's been a fair amount of research also done by the Nielsen Norman Group that shows that people don't even look. No, I take that back. It used to be that they don't look at stock photography. Now they don't even see it, right? We become so immune to bad, irrelevant stock photography. So if I had the choice between having a page on my site that was nothing but words, or a page that was words with some bad or irrelevant stock photography, I'm choosing the one with only words. And finally, make the page more scannable. The little secret here is sub-headlines, right? Break up your page using sub-headlines, lists, bulleted lists, numbered lists, link modules. You might need a website redesign to get some of this stuff at your disposal, but for some of it, you certainly don't. Just make it easier. And then you can be sure that when people find you from that search and they land on your page, that they're going to be able to comprehend what it is that you're trying to convey. And the puppy just woke up and is nibbling on my feet. So I'm gonna try to keep my concentration here. Okay, two last things I want to talk about, and then we'll take some questions here at the very end. So I'm going to show you two 30-second commercials. Here we go. I'm going to turn up the volume here. So here's the first commercial.
In an effort to get people to remember our name, Outpost.com, we contacted the local high school marching band and asked them to help us out. And to help make this memorable, we decided to release a pack of ravenous wolves. That's good stuff.
Okay, so that was commercial number one for Outpost.com. Now we're going to look at a second 30-second commercial.
Introducing the all-new Enclave. It's a minivan to the max, with features like remote control sliding rear doors, 150 cable channels, a full sky view roof, temperature-controlled cup holders, and the 6-point navigation system. It's the minivan for families on the go.
Okay, so I hope the lag wasn't too much and it was pretty clear. So we had the Outpost.com with the wolves and the marching band, and then we had what we thought was a car commercial, and it turns out to be a public service announcement for wearing a seatbelt. Both of these commercials use a tactic that organizations increasingly want to use, which is being unexpected. You may have noticed that advertising in your lifetime has only gotten weirder. Why? Because in these advertising boardrooms or creative suites, they think that the way to cut through all the content glut to seize attention is to be as weird or unexpected as possible. The problem is there's an effective way to do it and an ineffective way. The Wolves ad with the marching band is ineffective, I would argue. Why is it ineffective? Because the unexpectedness of it, right? Releasing the wolves to attack the marching band has nothing to do with the message they're trying to convey. It's what you might call a gimmick, right? It's a gimmick. It might make you laugh, but 10 seconds after the commercial is over, and by the way, that was a Super Bowl commercial years ago. Outpost.com no longer really exists. But 10 seconds after the commercial's over, you have no idea what it was for because it was a gimmick, because the unexpectedness had nothing to do with the message. Now, the seatbelt ad, I think, is effective. It uses unexpectedness effectively because the unexpected thing has to do with the message. Now, there's not a formula for being unexpected. And I know as government agencies, you typically don't have the freedom to be super creative or clever. But if you do, if you're given some leeway to start a campaign, I'm seeing this more and more. I'm thinking here in Austin, we have a bunch of really funny campaigns run by our Capital Metropolitan Transportation Authority to get people to use the light rail and the bus system. They do some pretty funny ads. So you may have some chances to be unexpected. The key is to make sure that the way in which you're being unexpected connects to the message you're trying to convey. Who's really good about this is the local news. So this is just one way to be unexpected that you might find helpful in your organization. The local news, they always do this thing where they'll run a commercial in the middle of the day that's like, is your toothbrush killing you? Tune in at 6 to find out. Or, what's the crazy new drug that teens are using? Tune in at 11 o'clock to learn. What that's called is called creating mystery. Human beings hate not having a resolution to an established mystery. It's the reason that the last episode of The Sopranos was so bewildering to so many. I mean, I loved it, but a lot of people drove them nuts because it ended sort of unexpectedly. They didn't know how things really, really ended. So this is just one tactic that you might consider using, which is create a little bit of a mystery. And this can be effective also in emails, right? Because typically people do not want to have that mystery unsolved. Create a little bit of a mystery. I kind of think it as like, give them a little dessert, give them their vegetables, and then give them the dessert at the end, right? Solve that mystery at the end. So again, don't be afraid to be unexpected, but not at the expense of clarity or offending your users. Stand out, but again, not at the expense of clarity, especially when clarity is especially important. All right, very last thing I want to talk about today is emotion. So here are the 4 basic human emotions. There's a typo on that third one. It should be a FRAD, mad, sad, glad, and a FRAD. I apologize for that. These are the 4 basic human emotions, right? Every other emotion you can think of is probably either some combination of these or some shade of these, but these are our 4 core emotions. And the truth is that really everything we do as human beings has an emotional component, or at least anything that we do of our own free will or voluntarily, right? Anything we do voluntarily has an emotional component. Every choice we make is on some level emotional. And that goes for, even if we're not particularly, quote, feeling emotional, it's often happening below the surface of our consciousness, but often it's happening right up at people talk about how, like buying a house is an emotional decision, like duh, right? Everyone knows that. But buying a pack of gum in line at the grocery store is also, to some degree, an emotional experience. Now, why is this important? Because we, as communicators, need to acknowledge this truth. We are communicating with emotional beings. And by the way, I've seen it firsthand. Government agencies often are communicating with people who are in an especially heightened state of emotion, depending on what, again, it is you do. So this is especially important for organizations like many of y'all. Now, you have to acknowledge this. Now, a lot of people, when I start talking about emotion, feel kind of icky, like, oh, I don't want to be craven or manipulative. I don't want you to be either. Never lie. We never lie, right? We never lie as an organization. We don't put up lies. In fact, we don't even stretch the truth. We always tell the truth as we know it, right? Assuming that, though, like, let's just give, it's granted that we're not lying. If we're not then also acknowledging and using emotion to persuade people, then we're missing an enormous opportunity. I often tell my clients that I'm working with directly on their content strategy, you don't want your users or constituents thinking about you or thinking about something. You want them feeling, because if they're feeling, they're doing. So let me give you a great example of what I mean. This is an example of an ad from the Truth Initiative or the Truth Campaign. They are a pretty popular anti-teen smoking campaign that started in the late 90s. You've probably seen their commercials. They use highly emotional content to make their point, to keep teens from smoking or to get them to quit if they've already started. They use fear, anger. They're very unexpected. They had a great commercial once where they pull up in front of the Philip Morris headquarters in a van, open the back of the van, pull out a bunch of fake body bags, and scream up at the headquarters, this represents all the people that your products kill every year, right? Highly emotional anti-teen smoking campaign. Now, at the same time that the Truth campaign started, another campaign started called Think Don't Smoke. Now, the Think Don't Smoke campaign was also a national, or at least mostly national campaign, but much more traditional, not emotional at all, much more logical, right? Making arguments. Hey, man, don't smoke because it makes your breath smell bad and your teeth yellow, right? That sort of more traditional public service announcement. All right, the puppy is yanking on my jeans now. Sorry. Okay. So here we have an example of an emotional appeal and a logical appeal. Oh, by the way, who ran this campaign? It was Philip Morris. They were forced by the federal government or a lot of state governments to run anti-teen smoking campaigns when they lost some lawsuits in the 90s. And a study done a number of years ago tried to compare. We have the emotional appeal and the logical appeal. Teens who were exposed only to the Truth campaign's emotional appeal were 66% less likely to smoke. Now, 66% in the world of advertising, that conversion rate is, it's enormous and unheard of. You'd kill for that, right? Now, teens who were exposed to the Think Don't Smoke, what do y'all guess? What was the reduction there? What percentage reduction came from the more logical, rational, argument-based, claim-based appeal? I'll let you take a guess. Was it more than 66%? A lot less, a little less? The answer is they were 36% more likely to smoke. More likely. Watching these ads, teens who watched only these ads and not the others thought, hey man, smoking looks pretty great. Why? Because there was no emotional connection to it all. They didn't feel anything. So please, always tell the truth, but as soon as that's granted, please use emotion and acknowledge emotion of the people you're communicating with. All right, let me sum this all up. I think we have, oh gosh, just a couple of minutes. I'm happy to stay late if y'all want to. But here, just to sum it all up, listen, you've got a lot of challenges. Many of you have very, very difficult jobs, but luckily, if we acknowledge those challenges and adopt some tactics, we can certainly meet those challenges. I think I threw this in here. I think we need to read more if we're going to be writing more, but I also want to emphasize, listen, focus on our audience, identify that Google and search is important, do the SEO work. Maybe nothing will do more for your conversion rates than SEO, no matter how beautiful your prose. Use concrete language when possible, add context to your numbers and statistics, make things easier on your readers' eyes. Don't be afraid to be unexpected, and please appeal to the emotional humans that you're communicating with, just like David Ogilvy did way back at the beginning of our talk today. Whew, okay, so before we open it up for questions, if you go to mightycitizen.com/web copy, you'll find this deck and a recording of this deck. It actually has some additional info in there that we had to cut for today's hour-long presentation. We also have dozens of additional free templates and resources and videos. So again, that's mightycitizen.com/web copy. Again, my email address is abuck, like a dollar bill, right? abuck@mightycitizen.com. Feel free to email me with thoughts or questions, or if there's anything I can do. And I've been talking a mile a minute for an hour, so I'm going to shut up and turn it over to our lovely moderator and ask if there are any questions at all.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. There are some questions. We'll try to get through what we can, and then perhaps you can follow up with people.
Sure.
One question that I think pertains to a lot of people on here is someone said they work for a field office of a federal agency, and the local landing page design is created by their headquarters. So the landing page contains events and lists for local, public links and things like that. So how can she make this stuff clearer, given that it's like one one agency who kind of manages everything?
Well, obviously without knowing the specifics, I'd say I've encountered this before. That's a pretty popular model, right? One agency with field offices, and often the power to control the website is centralized in the main office. And if they do give the field office any power, it's very, very limited. Usually they're working inside of specific templates, often with specific rules and policies. So whoever asked that question, I would say, please email me, abuck@mightycitizen.com, so that I can look at your particular site. Because the truth is, without actually knowing what you're allowed to do, and sort of what your site design is set up to handle, it's pretty difficult for me to answer it, but I'm sure we can come up with some answers. Sorry, I couldn't answer it more specifically, but I'd love to follow up with you.
Okay, great. Someone else asked if you can share a sample or two of writing for, the appropriate 8th grade reading level that you talked about.
Yes, that's a great question. So the ones I often point to are pretty much all the Harry Potter books are written right at an 8th grade level. The novel Great Gatsby. Great Gatsby is written at an 8th grade level. As for comparison, the Affordable Care Act, right? Obamacare, the actual bill, is written at a 14th grade level. So there's a little comparison for you. But yeah, if you think Harry Potter, you're in the right ballpark.
Okay. How do you convince content owners that a bunch of mediocre images isn't making their web pages awesome? And their point is that we're all told that good websites are visual.
Yeah, that's so good. So how do you convince them? Well, one way you could convince, one of the places that I would start would be by going straight to my Google Analytics. I want to look at these pages that they're in love with and see if they're converting, or if they have a really high bounce rate or something like that. I would want to go to the data first. Because listen, there's always exceptions. Maybe they have sites or pages that you think are really hideous and full of ugly photographs, but for whatever reason, they're performing well. Well, maybe you let it slide, right? So I would go to analytics first, though. And then I would also ask myself, do we have a content governance plan in place? So content governance is a relatively new or burgeoning field in the world of digital communications. And it's something we do a lot here at Mighty Citizen, especially for government agencies, which tend to be very siloed. Content governance is a plan that defines who has the authority, what are the workflows, what are the sources, sort of what are the actual hard and fast rules for how text, images, videos, etc. gets created, published to our site, archived, updated, etc. If you do not have a content governance plan, and by the way, the vast majority of organizations still don't, understandable, but we need to correct that. If you don't have a content governance plan, I would invest in creating one, because what you do when you have a content governance plan is you establish authority, so that even if someone stops by your office and says, hey, can you put this thing on the website? You have criteria to say, yes, I will, or no, I won't. And that's that. My word is final. So I'd look at the data, and then I'd say, do I have the authority to make that call? And again, happy to follow up with you in more detail if you'd like.
Perfect. 2 more questions. How do you tackle web pages of content that was written how we were taught to write in school? So how do you convince scientists behind those pages to work with you on overhauling those pages?
That's good. So this is so common. We were talking about like reading level, and something that always seems to happen, or not always, but it happens a lot, is like I'll talk about reading level and the person will say, yeah, but I hear you, but our audiences are really smart. Like we're speaking to a bunch of PhDs. And my point is, like, even if that's true and you're communicating to a highly literate audience, that is still no excuse to go much higher than 8.0. Here's why. Because if you chart the comprehension of website content as it goes over 8, it falls off a cliff. It's not just a steady decline, it is an exponential decline. So even the most literate folks find high reading level content difficult to comprehend. So I might point out that fact to them. I also think, again, of governance, someone has to be in your organization, has to have the authority to say, yeah, you're the subject matter expert, but I'm the communication expert. So you tell me what you know, and I'll figure out how to convey that to the world or to our specific audiences. But listen, I know it's difficult. It's tricky. There's not a one size fits all. These things are often very sort of personal, political. We work with a lot of universities. I see it there a lot where people feel very territorial over their school or their, programs page on the university website. And it can be tough to get them to give up control. Sometimes and by the way, with governance, you really want it coming from the top down. The higher up in the organization you can get someone to buy into this and invest you with that authority, the more effective it'll be. But yeah, I know it's tough. I feel you.
All right, and the final question, and maybe even the most important, is people want to see the puppy.
Okay. Come here. Okay. Here we go. Let's see if I can get him. I don't have my camera up. So he is unnamed as of now. He's 9 weeks old. I've had him for about a little less than a week now. I haven't named him because I'm horribly indecisive. I'm happy to take name recommendations. He is a Corgi mix, meaning mom was a Corgi, dad, Papa was a Rolling Stone. We don't know who he was. So he's all black with a little white tuft here in the chest, but I love him to death already. And he was very good during this, except for at the very end. He was a little bit of a stinker at the end, but who can blame him, right? He's bored. I'm going to go take him for a walk right now.
Well, I think that was all our favorite moment. I'll speak for everyone of the session. Sorry for doing that to you, but
no, happy to. So, remember that when you're filling out your post-conference surveys about this session, please. I showed you a puppy.
Well, Andrew, would like to thank you for joining us today. This was a great session. Just as a reminder for those still logged on, that the Blue Pencil Gold Screen Awards is tonight at 8 Eastern Time. A great opportunity to honor your fellow government communicators who have been awarded with the Blue Pencil and Gold Screen Awards. And check out the WOVA app for the sessions tomorrow.
Thank you all. Good luck.
Thank you.